So this is ThinkyHearts webinar. ThinkyHearts is simply a purpose-driven platform that's focused on advancing the energy efficiency, clean energy awareness, sustainability, leadership, and capacity building across Africa. And that's what we stand for in ThinkyHearts. So moving on into inviting our speaker, Dr. Azizat. She is an energy and climate consultant in Africa. She's into technical advisory and projects design. And she's also an energy efficiency, renewables, climate energy, and clean cooking consultant. She's also Tech Women Fellow. She's one who is an industry professional in the energy space. So join me in welcoming Dr. Azizat Sola Gbadegesin as she take on the stage and share with us on today's topic.
Yeah, hello, good evening. Thank you very much, Sam, for the introductions. As Sam said, my name is Azizat Sola Gbadegesin. I've been working in the energy space for over 16 years now. And this is just a session for us to share a little bit of the knowledge or experiences around energy projects as they relate, especially to Nigeria, but with a few examples from other countries in Africa as well. Today, we're basically going to take a quick overview about energy transition, especially in Nigeria. What are the opportunities there? What careers are possible? And regarding investments to drive this energy transition, where exactly are the options available? For the benefit of those who, or for the benefit of everyone here, I guess we're all always learning at some point in time or the other. We'll look briefly at the energy transition. What exactly is it about? What are the high growth sectors that are in this space? And then coming to financing and investments, how exactly does financing drive the transition? What skills are needed to drive this transition within Nigeria? And then we will highlight a few action points and then welcome question and answers. So basically, looking at the energy transition, the key learnings from this is that we intend to also identify um, what opportunities are there after having a good understanding of what the global energy transition is like. Why are other countries also transitioning, or why are they also part of this transition? But then for Nigeria, especially, what does this mean for Nigeria? What are the opportunities for um, solar mini grids and e-mobility, especially within Nigeria? And then how do you acquire the kind of skills that or identify the kind of skills that can help us to thrive as entrepreneurs? So in line with that, I'll start off by giving a general description of what energy transition is like. And for us, the energy transition basically looks at how do we, as the word says, transition from current energy sources and current ways of consuming energy and of generating energy. How do you transition from those current phases into um, at times cleaner energy use, or into ways of reducing the use of energy through better technologies while still providing the same um, level of outputs expected with higher energy. So there are a number of reasons, especially for other countries outside Africa, why there's that need for a transition. Outside many African countries is basically driven by decarbonization. There are high levels of carbon emissions recorded in many other countries. In the Western nations, there's a high dependence on fossil fuels to generate energy. And although Nigeria or Africa generally contributes a lot less, less than about 5% to global emissions, we're still at the receiving end of the like the hazards and the impact of climate change. We mentioned about floods, increasing erosion, desertification, and a number of climate impacts. So even though we might not be direct contributors or are high enough contributors to global emissions, we still also bear the brunt of the climate change and all the attendant effects that um, global emissions from other sources are. But specifically in Nigeria, ours is more of a need to increase access to energy. We're still lagging behind in terms of electrification rates, access to clean cooking rates, either in the rural areas or in the urban areas. We are definitely not at 100% like some other African countries where they can boast of 99% of electricity supply 24 hours a day. We are evolving. There are new incentives, new programs being put in place from time to time, but we still haven't reached that mark. There are still over 85 million citizens who don't have access to grid electricity. So our own, let me say, the one of the main driving forces behind looking towards clean and sustainable energy. It goes beyond just decarbonization, but also looks at how can we provide energy through off-grid and decentralized solutions that are readily deployable. We have a lot of resources that can be used for this. So how exactly can we harness that to address our energy shortages? As I mentioned, the grid on the average produces about 4,500 megawatts, and for a population of 200 to 20 million, that is quite insignificant. And obviously, it's not enough to drive economic growth. So what that has also led to is that there's a high dependence on diesel. The grid is not sustainable for industries or for residences. So industries, for example, have resorted largely to using diesel power plants or alternative fuels, gas in some cases, to power their processes. Even though some are in the urban areas and they do get access to electricity, the issue also with especially manufacturing industries, for instance, is that they can't afford to have any downtime in the process of in the manufacturing process. So there are certain processes within many manufacturing sectors that there has to be stable, constant light. Otherwise, that would affect the quality of the product that they're putting out there. It could be plastics, it could be um, mattresses, whatever that the industry produces. There are particular industries who are really particular about that. But there is a huge market in Nigeria. If we approximate from what we already spend on generators, at least even going beyond businesses, what households also spend on generators, it's a significant amount. But we have those resources. So our own transition is also looking at which renewable resources can we tap into to feed that need in the residential sector, in the commercial sector as well. So that brings us to identifying a few sectors within the energy transition and how Nigeria can, tap into that or is already tapping into that. So when you're looking at solar PV and mini grids, basically these are small grids powering. Um, they're decentralized. They're off grid, so they are not the typical grid from power holding company, but they are smaller grids set up in close proximity to where the energy is actually used. So in villages, for agri hubs, in remote areas, those mini grids are set up to fulfill the energy needs there. We also have the commercial and industrial sector where one of the leading motivations for CNI sector is to reduce their energy costs. So they are running diesel generators. That's about maybe 400 to 450 naira per kilowatt hour. Um, that's a lot of diesel that is burnt just to produce maybe 10,000 kilowatts that they will need in a day, multiplying that by 30 days, multiplying that by annual um, power need, that's a lot of diesel that's going to be consumed. So, alternatively, what can the manufacturing industry, hospitals, universities, and banks do is to look at commercial CNI or solar CNI options, where through different financing method facilities or options, they can actually get access to electricity. So they have a developer or an EPC company that comes to deliver this project or install the project. Alternatively, they can reach out to some companies that do financing for CNI projects, sign up an agreement with them, and then they get to pay over time. So they pay costs which are in most cases comparable to what they are paying, or most likely even better than what they already pay for grid, but definitely better than what they pay for diesel. So they'll end up paying over time, and then they could also own the system after the tenure of their lease agreements for the power for the mini grid elapses. There's also opportunity around energy efficiency, which is, I think I would say it's still a bit quiet, not really pushed out as much as solar and renewable energy, but there's a huge opportunity for actually reducing energy consumption, which would in turn also reduce the energy bills. And then if you're also looking at another application for that, is that by the time you are able to put in higher efficiency motors, HVAC equipment, your processes are audited, so you already identify areas or processes where there's loss of heat or loss of water and is causing additional heat generation needed, or additional water supply is needed. Identifying and plugging holes through energy audits can actually help reduce the power consumed by the system. And then, if the industry, for instance, then wants to transition into bringing in cleaner energy alternatives, that means since the energy demand is reduced, the solar CNI system that's going to be um, installed there is actually going to be a cheaper option, because they're now going to cater for a smaller load. Um, Lastly, and basically around the residential areas, another area where there's an opportunity in transition is around charcoal and firewood for cooking, and instead of that, using LPG or electricity for cooking. So the electricity option covers a wide range, apart from the hot plates, induction cookers. We could also look at electric pressure cookers, microwaves, fryers, but basically a wider range of cooking stoves or appliances that use electricity rather than coal or firewood. Though in urban areas, LPG is largely common, and when there's good electricity supply, e-cooking is also common, but a greater percentage of the Nigerian population, especially in the rural areas, still relies on charcoal, on firewood, and we all know how that has some effects on their health, on their time they spend cooking, and there are many other alternatives that can be used in cooking instead. Um, then maybe moving on to a few more that are also gaining traction, especially in major cities around Nigeria, is around e-mobility. So for the two-wheelers, the Okadas, the three-wheelers, the keke napeps and all that, there's also a transition to, rather than having two and three-wheelers powered by petrol, we're seeing an increase in use of electricity. So two-wheelers, especially I know in Lagos, I've been seeing a lot where we find delivery bikes. They actually usually electric bikes now. So what they do is a delivery guy practically just needs to go to a charging station, and within what, maybe 5 minutes, he drops the battery that he's been using at almost depleted, drops that, and then is able to swap that, put that in his bike, pay for that, and then just continue his journey. So he doesn't have to wait until wait while charging. The battery swap brings in the alternatives where you can just get in a full battery within a few minutes, and then you can move on. Similarly, we're also having more of three wheelers also switching to using electricity rather than petrol. You know, a lot of that has also been driven by increasing petrol prices. But with the battery swapping, it reduces upfront cost. Many alternatives are available nowadays where there's reduced upfront cost either for converting or for already have buying outright electric bikes from start. Um, then there's also battery storage systems. This is hasn't really been put in place in Nigeria, to the best of my knowledge, but in other countries we see where beyond a residential level or an industry or for a solar mini grid, you actually have the utilities themselves, the discos, the distribution companies having um, megawatts of energy storage. Could be batteries, it could be pumped hydro storage, where they're actually able to provide electricity outside the times where the transmission company, for instance, has um, transmitted electricity from whichever genco. Let me break that down a bit. Typically, the generating company transmits electricity, and because electricity generally isn't stored at the utility level, that means that electricity has to be used up immediately. So, with the network operating centers, they handle the transmission and distribution of electricity to the different distribution companies. But for a distribution company, for instance, that has its own storage system, what that helps is with they can actually store and take up more energy that is generated and transmitted, store that in their, within their energy storage system. And if for some reason the output from the gencos is low, what they can then do is then discharge the stored electricity, either if it's a, a large battery system or if it's a pumped hydro system. To also give it a bit more of context, in a city in South Africa, for instance, in Cape Town, they have they have a pumped hydro system. And what this helped with at a point in time when there were shortages in power supply and other cities were having maybe 16 hours of power supply, the city was actually able to offer maybe 2 extra hours of power supply to its consumers, so that they had more power supply because they had a pumped hydro power system where when the power supply was available, they used that and kind of charged the pumped hydro system. So that pumped water into a large reservoir, an upper reservoir, and when power was down or supply was down again, they then discharged this through that same pumped hydro system to generate electricity through the turbines and generate electricity for use. So they had done that as a way of extending availability of power supply. Then there's also the emerging or getting more common as well now, green hydrogen and carbon capture. So green hydrogen, when hydrogen is produced from renewable, green and renewable sourced electricity. And then we are then also looking at carbon capture and the carbon sector, where there are incentives um, for reducing carbon emissions, and then through the use of like e-mobility systems or CNI, there are actually credits given for this, and it's also a means of generating income for companies who are into that space. So within the energy space, we are familiar with some regulators, policymakers, ministries. There is many, if a couple of times there are some overlapping mandates among these. I know, understand Nigeria is a big country, so from time to time there might be some overlapping mandates, and that's in itself at times a cause for concern. But the it's important that we have the regulators driving policies to put things in place to create an enabling environment for the private sector to be able to do their business. Governments will not necessarily need to go into generation and transmission and distribution, but they'll have private sector, to come and take up different aspects of the electricity value chain. But along the line, we also need to ensure that government creates that enabling environment where developers, contractors, private sector have a good playing field, that where they can of course get their return on investment. And related to investment as well is also looking at the sources of funding. Where do we get funding for generation projects? Do we always need to go to philanthropic funders to give us a grant to put in a system somewhere, or are there opportunities to actually bring in commercial investment where an investor or a company invests in a particular system and gets return on their investment? This would, of course, only be enabled if there's an enabling environment provided by the government. And then that enabling environment also covers different levels. So while there might be an enabling environment at the national level, the policies are there. We also need to look at what exactly happens at the state levels. We are looking at the energy transition, looking at cleaner energy. Those policies are there at the national level, but what exactly are states doing individually to also contribute towards the national goal? And then we also need to break it down further and look at local governments too. What role or what roles are local governments playing to improve energy access within the country? Many times around Africa, we've understood that the situation is more of like the local governments are not readily enabled, or they don't really have the capacity to drive the energy transition. So it could be that they don't have enough expertise, they don't, or they have difficulties in accessing funding for projects. There are some that, for an investor, they might be at a risk. Maybe they are not able to provide guarantees to an investor that, okay, in our local government, for instance, we have two schools and the hospital would want to build a solar mini grid to power those schools and the hospital. But if the financier doesn't have that backing to which ensures that there's funding for this, then it becomes a challenge for the um for the investor to put down funds to enable that project that the local government is thinking about. In terms of carbon markets, that is looking at how we can monetize reduction of emissions. So, for instance, an industry is switching from using diesel generators. We can actually capture those the reduced emissions and monetize that through carbon credits, and then that will bring all sorts of incentives to the industrial sector, and more industries will look at options of switching. So apart from the benefits of reduced diesel consumption, they also stand a chance to get additional income through carbon credits that their switch or their transition to cleaner energy provision has afforded them. Okay, so looking into the skills and the career pathways. I'm assuming there are a few of us on the call who are either in school, graduating soon, or in their years of their career. There's a wide range of opportunities, both technical, financial, commercial, that's can open leeways into the energy sector. And luckily, because of the way the energy structure is, an experience gained in Nigeria is also applicable largely around Africa. So there's a large market where um, technical skills are needed, where commercial skills are needed, just not just in Nigeria, but beyond that. So if looking at the technical skills now, where we have examples where in the transition we need skills directly for system design. A client has come to you, for instance, that they need a certain number of kilowatts, or that they just need solar for their industry. So you need those technical skills where you can actually get the engineers to go to the site, assess the site, log some of the and log energy consumption within their facility. Once that is logged, design a system, um, a suitable maybe solar system, or solar with BESS, with battery energy storage system, or solar with BESS and their existing diesel generators or grid. Just find a way to find a sustainable system that the industry can afford. Then once that is done, you get the financing for that. There is also the level of procurement and construction. You need to buy the right technologies, recent technologies, tested and trusted technologies. Then you go through to the skills needed for construction. You, of course, you need to get a qualified company or an engineer to do your electrical connections during the installation, from the batteries to the panels to the inverters, to in the entire components. They need to be done by professionals. Um, Same thing for your integration of the battery energy storage system. Also, how do you manage the system where there's the battery, there's the solar, there's also the grid power supply. We also need to look around smart metering. We don't, I don't, I don't think many states in the country still use analog meters for logging energy consumed. So we're all done with analog meters, and everybody has gone digital. You can buy your units via your banking app or through a POS, load them onto your meter. So a lot of things are done digitally. So there's better technology, better monitoring, online monitoring of energy consumption and energy use. Then looking at system maintenance as well. They're looking at systems where um, we are looking at opportunities rather, where systems, once they're in place, they need to be maintained from time to time. There needs to be maybe cleaning the panels. They need to be different things that need to be put in place. On the commercial side, we also need to look at project structuring, project financing. How do you assess a project is going to be bankable when the funds come in? How do you manage the funds? What are the terms that you put in a power purchase agreement that is viable for not just the investor, but also something that the clients won't feel like, oh, they're being cheated, or one thing or the other. So something that's viable from not just from a technical point of view, but also from a commercial point of view as well. Then we also need skills around risk and compliance, ESG, environmental and social governance. There are a number of investors, for instance, who would want to understand how your systems are run within your organization, within the industry that they are funding the project for. Um, what considerations do you have for the transportation that you use within your organization, for instance? Do you run diesel generators to power your operations within that company? So they're just also trying to understand how you run and how compliant are you with ESG, internationally identified ESG um, limit and all. So these skills, as I mentioned, they also need to go beyond Nigeria. We can tap into the West African market. You can tap it or apply the skills within regional energy markets. There's West African Power Pool, for instance. So who sets the tariff when the electricity is generated in, let's say, Gambia, around Gambia, Sierra Leone, and then the same electricity is transmitted across the West African sub-region. Who sets the tariff? Who gets it at which rates? How much does Nigeria pay to get electricity through the West African power pool compared to how much maybe Ghana needs to pay, for instance, depending. So there are also a number of things you need to look around beyond just not just Nigeria, but where your skills can be, your technical or financial skills or knowledge can be applied. For time, okay, I'll just run through this slide briefly. This was basically looking at the energy efficiency sector and looking at how there are still some gaps within technical skills that are needed to drive energy energy efficiency. So when MEPS is minimum energy performance standards, and then we have standards and labels for appliances. So we need technical skills, people that will actually be able to test appliances with the right technologies. That okay, this particular refrigerator that's been brought or imported into the country actually has an energy rating, the energy rating written on the label, or maybe it's just written on the label and showing that oh, it's a class A in terms of energy, but actually once tested, you found that maybe it was a class B or is a class C, which is a less energy efficient refrigerator, consuming more energy to do the same job, but it's been labeled wrongly, like oh, maybe it just uses 100 watts instead of the 200 watts, for instance, that was actually measured. So you need those technical skills to be able to identify where there's compliance in terms of energy performance standards. We also need skills around energy auditing and to actually do the retrofitting after the energy audit has been done. The areas of inefficiency have been identified. Is it through the pumps? Is it through the motors? Has there been overheating? Or is it in the sizing of the cables? So once the energy audits have been done and areas of energy loss have been identified, how then do we begin to put in retrofits? Similarly, around skills around smart metering, and then also now with the use of AI, I think you had a webinar about 2 weeks ago, or like 2 webinars ago, where the issue of AI in energy management came up, and there are a lot of opportunities around that. But if we are not aware of the current situation, how then do we design outputs that AI can help enhance? Within the commercial and strategic skills or competencies as well, we also need to look at financing energy efficiency projects, also policies that can support energy efficiency deployment. And then to round up quickly, around the skills, the number of skills and career pathways as an individual or there's a small company depending that can also be taken up. So without having to have a big company where you're doing high level manufacturing, you could also look at consulting and advisory. You could look at reselling. I mentioned the e-swapping stations as well. You could have a setup where you have one shop or a number of shopping outlets where battery swapping is enabled. So bike riders come, put in their used up batteries and then get fully charged ones, and then you could have a number of those around so that it's readily accessible. You could also look at charging stations. You could look at battery recycling. There are a number of technologies available that can be deployed by small companies, by entrepreneurs. What will be most interesting also is not looking beyond just the technology, but to find innovative business models that will, of course, bring in more revenue, even with the existing technologies or improving on technologies already available. So within Nigeria, there are opportunities to also look at panel manufacturing, battery manufacturing, also to improve our capacity, as in technical capacity through vocational schools. And then in terms of policy and quality, looking at how we can streamline tariffs and bring in um, standards to ensure that the solar products coming into Nigeria, the panels coming in, or the batteries, imported into the country meet a specific standard. And it's not just about those standards, also ensuring that there's enforcement. Um, so lastly, to be part of this transition, I've mentioned a few. As professionals, you can improve on your technical skills, join relevant organizations, do courses online, look for opportunities for internship with organizations. As an entrepreneur, you could look at what are the needs within the community. If it's a transport issue, how do we bring in battery swapping, as an example, into your immediate community? And then for investors, what what technologies are they looking at, and what investments or what customer friendly packages can be provided? So typically small companies might not have all the technical data, audited accounts, financial data, audited accounts, and the likes that will be needed to get a huge grant. But if they are friendlier, even though it might be more risk to an investor, but if there are friendlier alternatives for companies to access funding or financing, that would also help um, grow and push the transition forward across the country. So yeah, I think that's about it from my end, and yeah, happy to get one or two, sorry, maybe a few questions from the audience, and we can discuss around this. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ma. Thank you, Dr. Azizat. Some question for you. The set target by Nigeria was formerly 2050. So what's changed between the 2015 net zero targets and the current? Because I saw 2016 in your slide. So what's changed between Nigeria's original 2050 net zero targets and the current 2060s targets? Was it a lack of political will, or was it intentional? Or intentional accounting or financing and probably infrastructure facilities. So what really changed from the date it used to be to the new set targets, man? In just a few minutes, man, can you help us to share more light on that, man?
Okay. So typically, as you said, the targets are set. It could be by a country, it could be by a city, to meet particular maybe energy access rates or electrification rates by certain times, right? More similar to how targets are set to for the climate space as well. Reduce emissions to so by 2030, by 2040, by 2050. Some of these targets, it's not like they are not achievable, but along the line, we also identify that there might be some hindrances that not pushing it. For instance, climate, let me use the climate space as an example now. Um, Maybe it was identified back in, let's say, 2000, for instance, that for Nigeria to meet its climate goals, there has to be up to, just weird figure, $100 billion pumped into the country to to put in place reforestation projects, to put in place maybe like incentives or drives to drive decarbonization within the industrial sector, maybe provide solar mini grids in rural communities or for small businesses that meet certain criteria. But many times, or a number of times, we don't have the financing to actually drive that change. And as they say, we no, I don't want to say it in pidgin, but if there's no money, if there's no financing, there's little you can do. There's also the issue around skill shortages. I've mentioned some of these skills are needed. We can't keep using the um, old technology, old knowledge to try to drive change down the line where the world has moved past a number of these technologies. So driving that as well is also related to finance somewhat to get the right people the right skills that they need to drive that change. So I'll say largely it could be due to financing, some of the actions and plans that were mapped out maybe 10, 5, 10, 20 years ago, as part of targets.
Thank you very much, ma, for that beautiful answer you gave to the question, ma. We have someone from Guinea-Bissau who is currently on the call. He just identified himself on the chat box. Thank you very much, alumni Guinea-Bissau. Thank you very much, Godman Sami Uko. Thank you very much. I'm just trying my best to say I can call everyone names. Thank you very much, Emeka. Thank you very much, Jumoke. Thank you very much, Oduanyo, for joining today's call. Thank you very much, Abdul Malik. Thank you very much, Adebayo. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, every one of us that joined the call. I do hope we enjoyed today's session and we gained practical and technical insights on the topic, right, which is about the future of clean energy in Nigeria. If you have um questions, concerns, clarifications on today's webinar we just had, ThinkyHearts social media handles, our email, our email, our website, and every other social media handles link are on the chat box. So we can do well to follow ThinkyHearts and do well to also chat up ThinkyHearts through our mail. And so we can, so in case we have questions, in case we have because there are certain things that were mentioned and we need clarifications. Once again, thank you very much to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Azizat. We truly appreciate you for giving us your industry insights on the topic, the future of clean energy in Nigeria. To this, we would end the webinar. Thank you very much, everyone that joined. Thank you very much, our esteemed speaker. We are truly grateful. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you to Mr. Moderator, and thank you everyone for joining. Have a nice weekend. Cheers.
Yeah.